I paid for my cousin's education, and he publicly humiliated me. My parting gift made him sob. The champagne glasses clinked around me as I stood in the corner of the Westlake Hotel ballroom, watching my cousin Mike work the crowd. 7 years of medical school, all paid for by me, and he was finally Dr. Michael Davidson. The banquet room glowed with expensive lighting, highlighting blue and silver decorations that probably cost more than my first car. I'd written that check too, just like I'd written checks for his apartment, textbooks, MCAT prep courses, everything since his parents, my aunt and uncle died in that highway pileup when he was 19. I sipped my drink, Uncle Rob's last words, echoing in my head. If anything happens to us, promise you'll look after Mike. He's smart, could really be something. 3 days later, they were gone, and I kept that promise, every penny of the $340,000 his education had cost. Mike climbed onto the small platform where a microphone waited. His white coat gleamed under the lights, fresh MD embroidery visible even from where I stood. The room quieted as he began thanking professors, mentoring doctors, friends who'd supported him through tough exams and rotations. I waited for my name, some acknowledgement of the financial support that made this possible. It never came. Instead, he scanned the room, found me in the corner, and his smile shifted, just enough that I felt a chill. And I'd like to thank my cousin for his contributions. The way he said it made the word sound dirty. You know, some people try to buy their family's love because they don't know how to earn it naturally. He raised his glass in my direction. But I appreciate the gesture all the same. The room filled with uncomfortable murmurs. I felt dozens of eyes turned toward me, people whispering behind cupped hands. Mike's smile never wavered, but his eyes were cold, challenging. I just smiled back. Not because I was happy, but because the leather portfolio tucked under my arm suddenly felt heavier with purpose. Tomorrow, Mike would learn exactly what kind of love I'd been buying all these years. But tonight, I'd let him have his moment. After all, I'd paid for it. Updated. Thanks for all the support on my previous post. I'm actually shaking as I type this. Didn't expect so many messages. I'm about to head into the graduation party now with my gift. Should I really go through with this, or just walk away and cut my losses? Growing up, Mike and I were never close. He was 4 years younger, the golden child of my mother's youngest sister. While I built a tech company from my garage and scraped by on ramen, Mike was winning science fairs and being featured in local newspapers as the next brilliant mind in medicine. Uncle Rob was a high school chemistry teacher. Aunt Sarah worked as a nurse. They were proud, hard-working people with modest means and a brilliant son they couldn't afford to send to an elite college. I remember family barbecues where Uncle Rob would pull me aside, asking for business advice, telling me how proud he was of what I'd built. Not bad for the kid everyone said would never amount to anything, he'd joke, referencing my struggle with ADHD and decision to skip college. He never judged my path, even when others questioned whether a tech startup was a real job. When my company finally took off and the first round of serious investment came in, Uncle Rob was the first person I called, which is why that final call from him felt like both a blessing and a burden. Mike has the brains to be an incredible doctor, he told me, but Sarah and I haven't saved nearly enough. If anything happens to us, I cut him off, told him not to talk like that, but he insisted, extracting a promise I never imagined I'd have to keep. After the accident, I found Mike sitting alone in his parents' house, surrounded by sympathy cards and casserole dishes. He looked lost, a 19-year-old suddenly without guidance. I'm dropping pre-med, he told me flatly, going to get a job instead. I refused to let that happen. I explained about his father's last request, showed him the acceptance letter to Johns Hopkins still sitting on his father's desk. Your parents wanted this for you. I'm going to make it happen. At first, Mike seemed grateful. He'd call with updates about classes, share stories about Cadaver Lab, send excellent grade reports. I'd visit occasionally, taking him to dinner, listening to his dreams of becoming a neurosurgeon. But something shifted during his 3rd year of medical school. The calls became less frequent, the thank yous more perfunctory. When I'd visit, he always seemed to have study groups or rotations that couldn't be missed. I told myself it was normal. He was busy, stressed, becoming independent. I kept paying the tuition bills, sending extra for living expenses, never asking for anything in return except occasional updates. The last real conversation we had was when he got into Harvard for his residency. I'd called to congratulate him, and he sounded irritated, as if my call was an intrusion. Thanks for the money, he said before hanging up. Not thanks for your support, just the money. But I never expected what happened at that graduation party, never imagined he resented me so deeply. As I looked around at the expensive venue I'd paid for, watching him bask in admiration from friends whose meals and drinks I was also funding, I wondered, what had I missed? What had turned my support from a lifeline into something he viewed with contempt? Whatever it was, I was about to deliver my final act as his benefactor. The contents of my leather portfolio would make sure of that. Standing at the back of the room, I watched Mike move from group to group, accepting congratulations, laughing loudly, occasionally glancing my way with that smug smile. I checked my watch, almost time for the gift presentation. I'd specifically requested to go last, and the event planner, whose fee I'd also covered, had been happy to accommodate. The DJ announced it was time for gifts. Friends presented Mike with typical graduation presents: a stethoscope, a pen set, some humorous medical-themed items. His girlfriend Allie gave him an expensive watch that I knew she couldn't afford on her grad student stipend. I wondered if he'd told her that I'd been secretly sending her rent money too, at his request, so they could live in that fancy Cambridge apartment. Finally, the planner gestured for me to come forward. The room quieted as I approached Mike, portfolio in hand. His smile tightened, eyes darting between me and his friends as if worried what I might say. "Mike," I began, keeping my voice steady. "Watching you graduate today fulfilled a promise I made 7 years ago." I opened the portfolio and pulled out an envelope. "I have something special for you." He took it reluctantly, clearly expecting a check, perhaps a final gift to set up his new life as a resident. I could see him already calculating how to dismiss it as insufficient or another attempt to buy his approval. When he opened the envelope, his expression transformed from smug confidence to confusion, then to dawning horror as he pulled out the contents one by one. First was the letter. The last letter his father had written to me, dated 3 days before the accident. I'd kept it all these years, this tangible reminder of my promise. Mike stared at his father's handwriting, his hands beginning to tremble. Next came the bank statements. 7 years of tuition payments, housing allowances, meal plans, textbooks, exam fees. Nearly $340,000 in total, meticulously documented. Last was the loan paperwork, the student debt I'd recently negotiated to take over from the university. The documents showed his original loan agreement with the signatures of financial officials acknowledging the transfer of obligation to me as guarantor. And across the debt record was a single word in red ink: forgiven. Mike stared at the papers, his face draining of color. The room had gone completely silent. Even the ice and drinks seemed to stop melting. "You never had student loans because I paid them as they came," I said quietly. "But I wanted you to understand exactly what your parents asked of me, and exactly what I gave. Not to buy your love, but because I loved your parents, and they loved you." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Your father's last words to me were about your future. He died knowing you would be taken care of. I kept that promise. Now I'm done." I turned to leave, but Mike grabbed my sleeve, his composure cracking. Tears were forming in his eyes, and his girlfriend was already wiping hers away as she read the letter over his shoulder. "You never asked," I replied simply. "The money was never about buying anything. It was about honoring them." I gestured to the documents in his hands. "The debt is paid in every way, we're finished." As I walked toward the exit, I heard a sound behind me that will stay with me forever. Mike's carefully constructed facade collapsing completely. He sank into a chair, documents clutched to his chest, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The stunned guests stood frozen, unsure whether to comfort him or follow me out. I didn't look back. Updated. "I'm overwhelmed by your responses. Many of you asked if Mike tried to contact me after. Yes, 47 missed calls by morning. His girlfriend even showed up at my house. She said he hasn't slept, keeps reading his dad's letter. Am I wrong for feeling nothing but emptiness?" The fallout was swift and extensive. By midnight, my phone showed 27 missed calls from Mike. By morning, it was 47. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sat on my deck with a glass of whiskey, watching the sunrise and feeling strangely hollow. Around noon, the doorbell rang. It was Allie, Mike's girlfriend, her eyes red and swollen. I almost didn't let her in, but something in her expression, a mix of desperation and shame, made me step aside. She settled awkwardly on the edge of my couch, explaining that Mike hadn't slept, that he kept reading the letter over and over. I poured her coffee but said nothing. "I didn't know," she continued, her voice small, "about any of it. The way he talked. He made it sound like you were this rich, controlling relative who helped out because you felt obligated. He never mentioned the promise to his parents." I nodded. "What else did he say about me?" She looked down, uncomfortable. "That you were lonely, had no real family of your own, so you were trying to buy your way into his life." The irony was bitter enough to taste. I'd dedicated my 20s to building my company, sacrificing relationships and social life for 16-hour workdays. But the reason I'd stayed single, the reason I'd worked so relentlessly, was to ensure I could keep my promise to Uncle Rob. To make sure Mike never had to worry about money while pursuing his dream. "Look," Allie said finally, I know it doesn't change anything, but he's devastated. He had no idea about the letter, about the total amount. None of us did. She twisted her hands in her lap. Is there any way you could talk to him? Just once? Studied her face, wondering if Mike had sent her as an emotional proxy. Did he ask you to come here? No, she admitted. He doesn't know I'm here. He's not in good shape. He keeps saying he destroyed the last connection to his parents. Perhaps that was the cruelest part of what I'd done, showing Mike exactly what he'd thrown away. Not just my financial support, but the last living link to his father's wishes, his parents' dreams for him. I took a long breath. I'll think about it, I said finally, walking her to the door. 3 days later, I agreed to meet Mike at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory. I arrived early, claimed a corner table, and watched him walk in. He looked terrible, unshaven, hair unwashed, still wearing the creased shirt from his graduation party, the brilliant, polished doctor reduced to a shadow of himself. He sat across from me, hands trembling slightly as he placed a small box on the table between us. I recognized it, the same box I'd used for his graduation gift. Inside was another letter, much older and worn at the creases. His mother's handwriting. It was dated right after his 18th birthday, addressed to him, likely intended to be read years later. It spoke of their pride in him, their hopes for his future in medicine. And in the middle, a paragraph about me. Your cousin has always been someone we admire, building something from nothing, never complaining, never expecting handouts. If something happens to us before you finish school, he's promised to help. Accept that help with grace, because it comes from love, not obligation. I looked up at him, feeling a crack in the wall I'd built around my emotions. He hadn't opened it until after the graduation disaster. After they died, he'd found it in his mother's desk, with "For Mike's medical school graduation" written on the envelope. He'd been too angry at the world, at them for dying, to read it. He'd shoved it in a box and forgotten about it. He'd found it when packing to move for his residency. After seeing his father's letter to me at the graduation party, he'd finally opened his mother's letter too. All those years he'd told himself a story about me, that I was showing off, that my help came with strings, because that was easier than facing how badly he'd failed his parents. I sat back, the anger I'd been nursing dimming slightly. Not extinguished, but reduced. 7 years, I said quietly. 7 years of payments, visits, phone calls. 7 years watching you become exactly what they hoped you'd be. And not once did you ask why I was doing it. He nodded, eyes downcast. I have no excuse. We sat in silence, 2 letters between us. Last wishes from people we'd both loved, both lost. The connection I thought severed still pulsing, however, faintly. I don't expect forgiveness, Mike said finally. But I needed you to know that I understand now, what it cost you, what it meant. He stood up, leaving his mother's letter on the table. That belongs to you too. She would have wanted you to have it. As he walked away, shoulders slumped, I called after him. Mike. He turned, hope flickering briefly in his red-rimmed eyes. Congratulations on becoming a doctor. Your parents would be proud. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was acknowledgement of his achievement, of our shared loss, of the legacy left behind by my aunt and uncle. I don't know if Mike and I will ever rebuild what was broken. Some betrayals cut too deep, some words can't be unsaid. But I kept the letter, this final gift from Aunt Sarah. And sometimes late at night, I read both letters side by side, his father's request to me, his mother's instructions to him, and I wonder if, somewhere, they know that in the end, their son became exactly who they hoped he would be, a doctor, a man who finally faced his mistakes, someone who perhaps might eventually learn the true value of a promise kept, even when it costs everything. Updated. 6 months later, Mike started his residency in Michigan. Last week, I received a letter containing a check for $340. He wrote, he'll send the same amount monthly for the next 83 years, his calculated lifetime. Would you cash the checks or send them back?